Hello, everybody. Welcome once again to this week's episode of hashtag Higher Higher Ed, hashtag Change Higher Ed. I'm excited for this panel today because graduate school is hard. Um, and I'm hoping this time is a time of solidarity for those who are finding difficulty, and for those who are wondering if it's time to leave graduate school, like even in the middle of what you're doing, that it's okay, that other people have done it, other people have are in the process of considering it, and some have gone away and then come back and published a book that was just released last week. And so that's the array of the folk that we have today. We're having a few technical difficulties with one of our panelists, so just I hope that you're patient with us as we kind of work through that as well. As usual, I hope that you participate by putting in some questions for our Q&A, and I think that will be really good to kind of, I don't know, like just kind of sharing that community aspect of what we're trying to do here. I would appreciate that. And then if you do, you get a chance to have a 30-minute coaching session, kind of like talk through maybe this decision with one of the panelists. And so I really encourage you to ask those questions. Next week, we have we're going to be having a guest speaker, an author of a book about what you can do with your PhD and going into a new career. And then for the month of December, I'm actually gonna stop doing this so I can like catch my breath on things, and we'll pick up after the first of the year. And so here we go. I'm going to bring them each on the screen, and they'll be able to introduce themselves. And again, thank you so much for everything and for being here. Like in a sincere way, I really appreciate that we have people watching. So here we go. We have Bilgesu, we have Carey, and we have Kaila. Ladies, thank you so much for being here. And if you could just give us a quick little, like, who are you and where are you now? And then we can go from there. Let's start with Bilgesu.
Hey everyone, my name is Bilgesu. I'm a PhD student at DePaul University. I'm located in Chicago, but I'm originally from Istanbul, Turkey. And right now I am kind of pivoting careers.
Okay, and Carey.
Hi, everyone. My name is Dr. Carey Yazeed. I am a former assistant professor. Notice I said former. And now I am a business strategist and a book coach, and I help professionals and entrepreneurs to tell their story.
Okay, and Kaila.
Hi, everyone. I hope you can hear me because I'm the one experiencing technical difficulties, but I think they've cleared up for right now, so fingers crossed. My name's Kaila. I am currently a digital content producer, so I'm a writer, a researcher, producer working in the interactive digital media and online learning space, and I am north of the border. I'm in Toronto, Ontario, Canada.
Okay, I feel like this is quite the international panel that we have going on today, and so this is exciting. I gotta say, I'm looking forward to this conversation and hearing your specific, like your stories that you have, because I feel like, I don't know, graduate school was really, really, really hard. There were some points when I was going through some things when I was at my PhD program, where I remember sitting in the office with my director just saying, I can't be in this class with this person who's causing this turmoil in my life, and like, can I do my classes independently? And the answer was, no, that's okay, you can't do that. And there are so many times when I came so close to not completing, and I don't know if I can confidently say I'm glad I finished, and that I'm glad I took that path, because it was a hard path, and I'm still kind of feeling a lot of the repercussions and those ripples that are happening there. It can be kind of an incredible place of learning, but can also be a very, very toxic place. And also it was difficult for me to admit that how I was also participating in that toxic culture. so all this to say, like, I'm really excited to get your perspectives and to really share them with other people who are in the same situations that we're in right now. And so I would like to kind of go through this kind of like as a progression in the types of folk that we have here. I would love to start with Bilgesu, because you're currently, like, you're in graduate school right now, and you're going through these different options and kind of weighing those through. And then I would love to go to Carey, because you made the option or the decision to leave and then come back. And then with Kaila, just like, it's like, you know what, better opportunities came where I didn't need to finish. And so if we could just kind of go in that little L-shaped thing, and then just kind of, yeah, tell us your story, like what's going on, and kind of like what brings you here on the conversation that we're having today. Bilgesu, please.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. So I guess my story goes like this. I finished my BA. I was super into what I was doing. I didn't really want to go into the job market because I was like, I just want to study. That's what I thought academia was, just like, borrowing into books and like creating ideas. And honestly, no one really told me that wasn't the whole story. So I got accepted to my PhD here, and I came here. And since the first day, the first thing that I got to like quickly realize was that this is a very, very precarious situation. Like, I got myself into this without really knowing what this was, because none of my like former mentors really told me what a PhD entails, or what being a PhD student entails, or what having your PhD and going into academia really entails. So I can't say I didn't like the experience of grad school. I did, but being there with little pay, no health insurance, no kind of like guarantee about like job prospects. We started like teaching our own classes starting like on year 3. So I was like thrown into the waters of teaching, and it turned out it's not necessarily my calling. So it was all that, plus being an international student, so not having the opportunity to like work elsewhere to like make a living, along with like not knowing what to do with my life, really just like accumulated along with other things to a point of burnout. So at that point I was already like halfway through my dissertation, but I had to take like a very like short stop and kind of like reassess my life. And weirdly, my decision to like pivot out of academia coincided with the pandemic. So I got my work permit. I'm still like job searching. I'm intending to finish, but it really like at this point it feels like it's not necessarily a decision, and more about like what comes my way, I will like follow it. It's not a necessity, and more like a personal commitment rather than like a career choice. So that's kind of like where I am. I can't hear you, Eric, for some reason.
It's probably because I was muted.
Okay.
No. What I really appreciate about that comment was this idea of that it's not your calling, right? And I think that's really important, because there are so many people, like when you voice concern about completion within the program, the answer almost inevitably comes back to, well, what's your passion? Like it's like, this is what you're calling, that you should be doing this. But you're kind of going to advice from people whose perspectives are just really, really skewed. And when your own calling doesn't align with that, I mean, it's a really hard culture shock. And so, yeah, thank you for sharing that and being open with that about that. Carey, what are your thoughts?
My experience was kind of similar. I was actually in my first PhD program, but I was going through a divorce, and we were actually in the whole custody process, and I really didn't have like a support system. It was just a lot, and And it was online on top of that, which I later learned that I am not a good student when I'm a great teacher for online. But as a student, I do better when I'm in the classroom and I can pick a teacher's brain. I can interact with classmates. Like I need that to thrive. And so I dropped out of that program. I want to say it was like 2011, which was around the time that I actually transitioned into higher education. Um, and also during that time, online degrees were still PhDs especially were frowned upon in certain academic arenas. And so the university that I was at, that was the thing I was told was like, okay, that's still not a good look for you anyway. So, and I had plans to like stop the program, but I was planning to take a break, not necessarily depart from the program altogether. So I left that program, and the department that I was teaching in, they found me another program. And that program wasn't like an executive program where you went one weekend a month. So it was very intense, but I wasn't required to be there a lot. So that meant that I could still be there for my kids. And I was now the caretaker for my dad, who was on dialysis. And one day, actually one weekend when I was away, I got a phone call from my dad, and he was like, his health was like rapidly declining. He had my kids, and I was basically like, I've got to go home to see about my dad and my kids. And I was just shocked that no one in the program understood that I was putting my family over my education. And it was just kind of like, you got to trust the process. Excuse my language, but I was like, damn, the process, like, this is my dad and my kids. Like, and his health is failing and he has my kids. Like, so, and they were like in elementary and middle school. Nobody could drive, like, and I'm like 3 hours away in this program. And so when I left that day, the only time I went back was to take my final exams. And I basically was just kind of like, I don't think this is going to work. But then I had goals and aspirations and dreams for higher ed. And I tell people, back then I wanted to be the female president of a HBCU. Like that was my goal. So I needed a PhD at this point. And so some phone calls were made to Louisiana State University, where I ended up at. But they had heard about me because of the research that I was doing at the university that I was currently teaching at. And so they saw it as a win-win to have me as a part of their program. And when I went there, they took my credits from the second PhD program that I was in. They accepted my credits, which really helped me out a lot. They kind of let me plan out my course of study, and I was able to finish up in 3 years. But that was 3 years of me going full-time, nonstop, still being a caretaker for my dad, raising 2 kids as a single parent, and working a full-time job up until my last year of grad school, when I had to leave my job so that I could complete my PhD studies. But I found myself in a position where I had to put myself and my family first. And I was really heartbroken that higher ed did not understand that. And I think for me, that left this uneasiness for me of, I didn't know if that was something I foresaw myself doing long term after that. And then my dad actually died 3 months after I got my PhD.
Wow, I think like there are a couple threads that you mentioned that that I think that a lot of people can relate to, and I think as the dynamic of the folk who are going into graduate school and pursuing these degrees, it's not just like, oh, like I exist in isolation and I can go and devote all my time to doing this. No, like we have families, we have health issues, we have mental health issues. There are so many things that happen, and the two things that those previous programs that you had mentioned were lacking, and that, like in a previous conversation that we had talked about, that you really enjoyed about this third program at Louisiana, was the support system. Like it was designed to actually support you, and not just like in a very superficial kind of way, which I think a lot of people have experienced, that I experienced, but just how important it is that to recognize that you have needs and you have priorities, and that you need a support system. And if the thing that you're devoting your life to isn't going to support you in that pursuit, you can find a program that will, and one even more so, one that wants you, and one that will value you in the way that you're meant to be valued, like as a human person. No, thank you for sharing that. Kaila, could you share us with your story as well?
Yeah, I mean, there's so much about both those stories that I've been nodding the whole time, because I'm like, there's so much about both of them that I relate to. And I guess to kind of just pick up on that thread we were talking about support and stuff, one of the things that I really found was that, life circumstances just drastically changed from the time I entered into school to the time I was actually kind of looking up and reevaluating things. Canada's a little bit different, or at least the program I was in is a little bit different in that the master's is a separate degree. So I got accepted into my master's at York University, which is in Toronto, and in social anthropology. And I did my 2-year degree, had a blast doing it, really enjoyed it. Kind of changed supervisors and the people I was working with, and got exposed to this whole realm of thought that was just very exciting, and I wanted more of it. So I thought, sure, I'll do the PhD, and I just jumped on board. And just really, really immersed myself in that for a few years. As I said, I was in social anthropology. So, I got through my coursework, I got through my comprehensive exams, and then I had a year of expected kind of immersed field work that was very difficult to finance and fund. And some of the pressures around that situation really, really started stacking up. It turned out I was able to do that. I was able to pull together the resources I needed to do my research, but I did come back feeling a little bit burnt out. I also got back, life circumstances changed. I also went through a breakup that, really changed sort of my access to resources and sort of the way I was splitting expenses. That financial aspect became even more and more of a struggle. And it was also around that time, though, that I was working with other contract faculty. I was moving up. I was kind of working as a TA. I was running seminar sessions for professors who were adjunct. And I was watching them struggle in their positions and what that role really actually looked like. They were working constantly. They were teaching multiple courses. Some of them were teaching across different universities. They always seemed to be on the go. The teaching was taking up so much time, they weren't actually always able to put the time into their research or their publications. And I was watching that whole situation kind of unfold, feeling like the road in front of me was just closing down, that the possibilities and the things I was hoping to have in my career were just shutting down one by one by one. So to kind of what Eric was saying about, like the precarity of that, and sort of, not feeling like I knew what those options were, feeling everything shut down, and then also being told that I should be doing this because it was my passion, and then struggling with it all just kind of came together in this way where I was like, I don't know why I'm here, and I don't really know what I'm doing. And the things that you're asking me to also give up in terms of, the other aspects of my life, you're asking a lot. And I don't know if I love it this much. So that was the point where I felt like I needed to take a step back. I was in good standing at the time because I had gone through my comprehensive exam. So it was a really easy process to just kind of take that step back. And I did it with the intention that I would finish. I spent a good couple of years actually writing my dissertation in my off time, working full-time, writing part-time. But eventually the opportunities in my career started getting bigger and better and more interesting. And they also got very demanding and time consuming. And it was really hard to also tell other people in my life that I was going to, work the hours I was working at work and then, spend the weekend working on my dissertation. I wanted to make sure that I had a more balanced better work-life balance. And so those things kind of all accumulated, and it was kind of a moment, I guess almost about a year and a bit ago, where I actually had to say, like, you know what, this actually is not taking precedence anymore. Maybe it's time, for my own mental health, for the well-being of like other aspects of my life. Maybe it's time to actually take that step back and just acknowledge this is where I am. So.
Yeah, and again, I feel like there are just so many like little snippets that I personally again can relate to, and just I think it's fascinating. Like one of the things that I would tell my students to do, like it's like, oh, like you want to pursue this career, go and talk to somebody who is in that career and see if that's something that you would like to do. But that doesn't happen very often with PhD students, and or the prospect of being a PhD student. And if it does, all that information is coming from the person who's kind of sitting in that comfy chair, who has tenure. And that's now becoming especially after like with COVID, just a smaller and smaller percentage. And so just like the reality of what it means to have a PhD and to earn a PhD has become so, I don't know what the word, like just foggy. Like it's something that's almost to like actively being concealed. Yeah, and I find that really, because just really frustrating. So the next question was, like what was one of the reasons why you kind of left higher education? But I feel like we've kind of touched on those a little bit, and so I want to go to this decision because. Or this next question, and I added another one towards the end. So let's start with this one right here, just to kind of throw us on a loop for our planning. But this right here is like what has been hard, like specifically hard about these decisions, but then also kind of pair it with like, I mean, what has been rewarding with these things that have been happening as well. Kaila, how about this time? We'll start with you.
Sure. Yeah, I'm happy to jump in on that one. Because I think actually it is, for me, it's actually kind of a coin flip. It's like it's both sides of the coin. So I think the hardest part of the decision for me was having to separate myself from the image of myself as that scholar, professor, academic. When you spend so many years immersed in that, immersed in academia, studying this thing that you really, really love. I mean, obviously, a big part of yourself your self identity gets wrapped up in that. So, like for me, the fact that I was also a PhD student, and like that was how I introduced myself at parties and when I met people, and like it was a big part of how I understood who I was and how I was presenting myself to the world. So, having to step back from that. Was really hard. And it was hard, just in terms of having a vocabulary, how do I introduce myself? How do I talk about, what I do? But it was also just emotionally, like there was a lot of just emotional wear and tear from that. You kind of go through a bit of a mini identity crisis and have to think about, okay, well, again, who am I if I don't have this piece kind of that has been the thing that's defined me for so long? The flip side of that is that it's really rewarding to start finding those other pieces of yourself again, to start seeing how you can, bring your creativity and your passion and your enthusiasm for a topic, for subject matter, for just a way of being. For me, it was rediscovering myself as a storyteller, kind of leaning into that part of myself again and really starting to explore what that could mean in a lot of different areas of my life, in my own creative work, but also in my professional work. So again, like I said, kind of two sides of the coin. It's really, really difficult. It's really challenging. But the other side of that is that it's been a very rewarding process. And I guess the other thing I'll just say real fast too is, there's, I think, an image when you're leaving academia that you're never going to do anything interesting again, like that this is like a little bubble or oasis where you get to be like this brilliant creative thinker engaging with all these awesome ideas, and like you're never going to work like that again. And that's a lie. Some of the most creative, collaborative people I've met have been, since leaving that environment. And so that's the other part that's just been really rewarding, is like finding sort of my co-conspirators and my collaborators in the world. So.
Okay, yeah, I love that. Like the ability to, like, you can still do the things that you love doing. And I wrote this down. I love what you said. Like finding those pieces of myself again, because when you start graduate school, you sacrifice things. And sometimes it's unfortunately it's things you don't want to sacrifice, like family time, and those things that are important. But then there are also the things that you miss doing, and that you love to do, that you just don't have the time to do. I think with this, I'd like to hear from Bilgesu, and because you're pursuing a doctorate degree in something that you are passionate about with film and screenwriting. And I'd love to hear your perspective on that, and then we'll kind of go in and to Carey, who is celebrating some amazing success this week too, with her book that's been published, and it's a #1 bestseller right now. It's Shut 'Em Down: Black Women, Racism in Corporate America. So like just to show that you can still pursue and have all of those rewards. And so Billy, tell what has been your experience having to go through this transition phase, and that line of finding and rediscovering some of those things that you're passionate about.
Yeah, a lot of like what Kaila said obviously resonates. Like in terms of like what is hard about this decision is that at least in the initial stages of the decision, you're gonna feel like a failure. You're gonna feel like, okay, I literally couldn't. I guess I'm not good enough to see this through. I guess I'm not good enough to complete this thing that I devoted whatever years of my life to. So there is a lot of like identity crisis when you're like coming to the decision, and there's a lot of fear, like, because when you're in academia, you don't really know what's going on outside of the academia. So it's a lot of like darkness, and you're not really sure if you're like ready to like leap into it without any kind of security. And unfortunately, like being a grad student doesn't give you any kind of security, whether financial or mental, like you're going in there like butt naked, literally. So they tell you have skills that you can transfer, but I'll be honest, a PhD isn't really worth much outside of this bubble. So there was a lot of hardship just to make the decision, just to be able to say, you know what, okay, I'm gonna try different things. The rewarding part is obviously seeing that you have so many options. Like you don't have to be one thing just because you've taken this path. Like when you're a PhD, I'm sorry, my cat's coming into the picture. When you're a PhD, you have literally one job prospect, becoming like a professor. And if you like what that entails, that's great, but if you don't, you're kind of like in a really hard position. And for me, I love philosophy. Like there is nothing about philosophy that I don't like. I wish we lived in a society where we would be able to pursue critical thinking in a sustained manner, but I don't want to become a professor. And there is only so many things that I can do with a philosophy PhD. So I'm really happy, as Kaila was saying, to tap into those other parts of me that I've been kind of that I didn't even know that I was suppressing. And they just kind of started just emerging once I let go of certain things, once I let go of doing things that were just eroding my soul day by day. And I was like, you know what? I think I'm refining my voice. And that's a beautiful feeling, to feel like you're not only defined by one thing in your life, but you can be so many other things. It's hard work. I am struggling to show that to people outside of the academia, because we've been conditioned to kind of shut ourselves in and not really make connections outside of it. So it is a challenge, but I'm not hopeless. So I don't know. I guess the most rewarding thing about it is that that feeling of openness, that feeling of I don't want to say opportunity, because that a lot of luck is involved in opportunity, but possibility. I like the feeling that things are possible that didn't seem possible before.
Yeah, I think you touched on something that's very, very important there. and especially in the context of everything that is happening right now with the COVID pandemic, right? If you want to pursue professorship, and if you want to pursue those things, and that is your dream, no one is telling you to stop, right? But if you're unsure about whether or not that's your dream, or if there's any doubt, it's devastating what is happening right now with higher education. COVID, like the article that I read most recently with Chronicle of Higher Education, they've estimated a 10% drop in higher education workforce since the beginning of COVID, which translates to 448,000 jobs. Things are happening, and all those jobs that you want to apply for, that market is going to be fierce, more fierce than it ever has been. But again, that's not to say that not to pursue it if that's your dream, but you can pivot so you can make that easier. And I think that, Carey, I think that you're an excellent example of that, because you've accomplished that, and you have this book that has come out and that's kind of killing it right now. And it's a matter of channeling that place and to getting it to where you want to go. And so I love, could you tell us more about that part of the story, and kind of like going back to that idea about like what was difficult about it and rewarding with where you are now?
So I was considered a non-traditional student. I started working on my PhD in my 40s. So I already at that point had like 23 years of work experience under my belt. I had also owned like several businesses. I had been a best-selling author. Like I had done a lot of things. So I came into the whole, higher ed with a whole different mindset and perspective. I didn't drink the Kool-Aid, I think, like everybody else did. And for me, I enjoyed teaching. Like I will readily admit that I enjoy being a professor because I had done everything else. And again, it was just like not having that support, not from my students, but not having the support from like your colleagues and your coworkers. And I freely share with people, like actually my first assistant professor position, I left after a year because I was being sexually harassed. The university did not support me. They actually believed the perpetrator over me, who admitted that he was doing this. So they offered me no support. And he was allowed to continue with his behavior. And this individual was a student. They weren't a professor. And it got to the point where they had locked me in my office at one point. It was just horrible. And I just kept saying, like, I did not go to school and spend all this money for my life to look like this right now. And Eric, you had mentioned mental health. And at that time, I was starting to like just fall apart mentally. I was seeing a therapist, and I also was seeing a psychiatrist. And my background was in mental health. So I had done 23 years as a clinical therapist. I had my own private practice. I wasn't like, unfamiliar with this territory, and I knew I needed help. But I also began to realize, like, I have a family. I can't stay here and continue to do this. And so for me, the hard decision was one day, as the kids would say, I flashed out. Like I lost it. They pushed the wrong buttons. I realized at that point I had PTSD because it came out in full force that day. And I was grateful that I had my support system of a therapist in place, because I immediately called her and she walked me through getting my belongings and removing myself from campus. And I was like, I cannot go back. Like, and I really enjoyed my students. I enjoyed teaching, but I did not enjoy being in an atmosphere where grown people do not support you, and everything that you're done is put under this microscope. And I kept saying to myself, like, there's this whole world out there that you all have isolated yourselves from. You live in this bubble, and this bubble is not reality once you step off of this campus. It's not that. And so my biggest regret was I left. I didn't have a plan B. And what saved me was that I had all these skills that I had developed over the years that I was able to really sit down and say, what did you enjoy doing before higher ed? What made you happy before higher ed? And I was like waking up when I wanted to and being my own boss. And so I went back to doing that. And so I did business coaching for a long time. I've actually worked with over 600 women, helping them to like successfully start and build and leverage their own businesses. And that brought me a lot of happiness. And then from there, COVID happened. And so I'm online one day and I'm actually sharing my experience of what happened with me in higher ed. And I'm sharing it on LinkedIn. And then my inbox got flooded and other women started sharing like things that had happened to them. And, you know, and people were like, can I talk to you like offline? And then I was just like, wait a minute, nobody talks about this. Like nobody's talking about what we go through in quote unquote corporate America. And that's where the book came from. And so I'm self-published. I self-published all my books. And so I put a call to action out there. If women were brave enough to share their stories, that I would give them the platform to tell it and I would pull it together. And like I said, that wasn't on my vision board for 2020. That was a COVID thing. And we started in July and last Friday. So we published, went to print like the end of October. So this is recent. And Friday, I actually went online to look for something on Amazon. And I actually looked at our book and I just like start screaming and crying because Amazon doesn't send you a notice and tell you this. And like we were #1 in new releases on Amazon. And for me, that was like a phenomenal experience because when I left higher ed, I really like so many people said I was making the biggest mistake of my life. You're throwing your career away, and for that, it was like I proved the naysayers wrong because again, I understand publishing. And so you have professors out there who are writing books and they never see a dime from it. Because they're with they're actually like, vultures is what I call them. These university publishing housing that take all your money and you never see your royalties, but a lot of them don't even understand the whole business behind it. And here I am, I'm self-published, and I not only did this for myself, but it was like I brought along 20 other women who had traumatic experiences in corporate America. And when I sat down and I thought about it, I was like, if I was still in higher ed, I couldn't have done this. I couldn't have told their stories. I would have been micromanaged. Someone would have called me on intellectual property and the university would have been looking for their cut and everybody else would have taken credit besides me, the person who actually did all the work. And so just walking away with that feeling, that was like the biggest reward for me, knowing that I made this decision, I put myself first, and it's been a hard 4 years, but like the payoff has been something that I wouldn't trade for anything. So I have no regrets about the decisions that I've made.
Yeah, again, like thank you all for sharing your stories. Because I love higher education. Like I love being in a classroom. I love to teach students. There are so many things that I am passionate about in the traditional sense of passion about when it comes to higher education. But here's the thing about academia that, it's been kind of going around and different conversations is like academia will never love you back. And it tries to take and take and take and take. And is what I think like the message that I'm getting here is that you did not develop this passion that you have when you got to graduate school. Like that's what drove you to go to graduate school. And you can find other channels for that passion that are not in graduate school. Because I think there are a lot of people, because like Carey, like you talked about, like how you were able to go out and like have like some great experiences for 20 plus years before coming and making that decision. Whereas I think that my story, I think, resonates a little bit more with Kayla's, when that like was just kind of like the thing that I needed to do next. Like, it's like, oh, okay, like I finished this. Well, I know I want to do that, so I should probably go to graduate school. And I think that there are far too many people who are choosing graduate school as a default option, which is not financially a great idea. Future security, not a great idea. There's really not a great idea to do it. And just really like encourage, like I want to encourage people to really ask yourself if like this is the thing that you want to do. And if it is, awesome, great. Just know what you're getting into. And if it's not too late to bail. And I can really resonate with that sense that Bilgesu was talking about. Like, it's just like that feeling of going through of being a failure. Like Kaila, like you mentioned, it's like, oh, like I identified, like I was a PhD student, like that's what I did. And now am I a former PhD? Am I a former academic? Like, does that label include the failure that I have perceived, when in reality, it's just a different direction. I think with that, I honestly, I feel like there is an obligation that professors have to share the reality of what's going on. This is the question that I kind of thought up as we were having a conversation, that I'd love to get your perspectives on. Like, if you were to go through everything again, like what do you think that universities should do to prepare students before making the decision to go to graduate school? Like, not the counseling that happens afterwards, or the lack of career professionalization that happens afterwards, but before they make that decision. What would be some of the things that you'd want people to encourage you to think about and do? I'll kind of like leave this one a little bit open if anybody wants to jump in on that.
I'll jump in on it. As a former college professor, one thing I'll say is that with my students, we would talk about grad school, and I would have representatives come in to the classroom and talk to them about their universities. I would have the students to do research and presentations on the program, because I was a social work professor. So our undergrad students naturally kind of progress into an MSW program. And so, I didn't want them to go in blindly, but I wanted them to see what the demands would be for each university, and to see that each university is different. And we would also sit down and look at the cost, because that's something a lot of people don't do. You get these degrees and you think you're going to be making $1 million when you get out, and you almost $1 million in debt. And then you got a job that doesn't even allow you to pay what you owe Sally Mae. And so we would talk about finances, and I would say, what are your goals after grad school? How much debt can you incur? Let's look at what the salary is going to be for a social worker when you get out. That program might not be, like, I know you want to move to New York, baby, but like that might not be the program for you. You might need to go to the state school back home, where you don't have out-of-state fees. You can stay with your parents, and tuition is more affordable. And I found that was not being done in other departments across the university. And so I was just seen as like this rare gem, because I cared about my students. But I also didn't want my students coming back 5 years later saying, you didn't tell me. Like, I was like, yeah, I won't be that professor. Like, let's have a conversation. And so even now that I'm not in the classroom, I have former students that will come to me and say, these are the universities I'm looking at. Can I call you, and can we sit down and have a conversation before I make my final decision? And I think that is the responsibility that universities need to start taking on. And if the university isn't going to take it on, if you're a professor and you're teaching undergrad or you're teaching master's level students, these are conversations that you need to take upon yourself to help your students with, because trust me, down the road, they remember who was the one who kind of pushed them into these programs that they now they're struggling to pay their bills at home, and they have all this student loan debt.
I wanna continue. I totally agree with everything. But I also feel like there is a structural problem that even goes beyond what universities individually can do. Like the system of higher education is unsustainable because it's churning out PhDs, but there are no open positions. So it's like almost 80% of the workforce is like adjunct. So why isn't no one talking about this? Like this is this is an employment issue. Like, are you ready to sacrifice at least 5 years of your life for a degree so that you can jump into this super competitive and super quickly decreasing job market where you might find maybe a tenure track job in a state, in a town that you never even heard of before, and move every year with your whole family, do a job search every year, and you still might be job searching for an adjunct position when you're 40. I really wish that was a part of the conversation, even beyond what grad school entails. And I would also, if I was where I was before I applied, I would want my professors to tell me, if you're gonna get into a program, make sure they give you health insurance, make sure that they have a good system for supporting you, make sure that you're not gonna be teaching your own courses right out of the bat, make sure there are all these things in place. And if the program that you got accepted to does not include those, maybe think twice, or maybe even think 3 times, because it might just be a bad decision. I know that if I knew what I know right now, I would not pursue this. I would pursue something else. And again, it's not because I don't like philosophy. It's not because I don't like reading and writing and thinking and discussing and being part of an intellectual community. It's just I feel like I made a bad decision in terms of moving my life somewhere, So it's not a passion thing. I really wish if there was one thing that drops out of the conversation, don't talk about this as a passion thing, because it's not.
I think that's a really excellent point about the fact this is an employment decision. I mean, for myself, and I was doing that sort of, you did your undergrad, you did your master's. I was still in my mid-20s when I was making decisions about my PhD program. It never occurred to me that I was making an employment decision, that I was actually, that shift, hadn't happened yet. And it was okay for the first little while because I was still in coursework and it still sort of followed sort of a schooling trajectory. But it hadn't occurred to me that the things that you would ask an employer for, that we should have been demanding that from our university and from our programs, and learned how to look at the offers the university was giving you with sort of that type of lens in mind. I think would be really, really key. The other point, though, that I kind of wanted to raise was the fact that it's not even just about, I applaud Carey so much. I wish I'd had a professor who could have been real with me about the decisions I was making. I think in part that sometimes happens because the professors are the ones who made it. So they're not necessarily, they're kind of seeing the whole process through the rose-tinted lenses. They're not necessarily keeping up or apprised of how the job market has transformed. They're not always the people who are the best to be asking those questions to, and yet they are the ones that when you go, hey, I'm thinking grad school, I should go talk to a professor. It's just not always the most relevant perspective on it. The thing I wished was that I never got exposed to what else was out there. All I knew was that I love to think, I love to write, I love to read philosophy, I love all of those pieces, and it never occurred to me that there was going to be another spot in the world that would let me do some of those things. I mean, not as much as, during your comprehensive exams where you're reading a zillion books to write up a paper, but at the same time, there are there's other sectors, there's other industries, there are job descriptions out there where those still play really big parts in what you do day in and day out. But I didn't have that exposure. I didn't have job experience outside of sort of, service sector, working at bookstores and coffee shops kind of thing. I didn't have that frame of reference. And the one thing I'm really envious of when I speak to people who've come up behind me is internship programs and like things actually set up in the structure of their coursework and their degree progression that actually made them kind of go out into the world a little bit and get some of that exposure to some of those other things. Because again, the university gets very siloed off. That's a problem in its structure as well. And as long as it's staying siloed off, you're never going to get that opportunity to kind of bump up against the other possibilities. That was one of the words Bilgesu was talking about, was, that sense of possibility. I don't remember ever looking at a world outside of academia and thinking there was possibility there. There's so much possibility there. So actually having some opportunities to brush up against it, I think would be incredibly helpful.
Yeah, I think I love this thread of why are we asking professors for advice? Because like in a really real way, because it's not like there's a whole lot of those jobs that are available right now. And one of the things that I'm kind of hearing that, like, if any of our viewers or listeners are in a position to do something of this sort, if you are working with graduate students or you're working with undergraduate students, you need to have a panel full of people who work in industry, who did not go the professor route. You also need to have a panel completely full of adjuncts. Let them, like, listen, like, how long, like, I mean, I know some adjunct, like, they've been doing the adjunct circuit, like working at 2 different places at 45 minutes apart for 15 years. How much time are you spending in your car just doing that? Or I was talking with this one woman at the end of last year. She was juggling 6 different university adjunct positions. I can't imagine having to deal with one university's indecision about what to do with COVID, let alone 6 universities. Like those are conversations that you need to have. And if your university is not providing them for you, talk to the people in your department who don't have that professor title. Talk to the ones who are teaching 6 classes and not the 1 class while they get paid twice as much, right? I mean, that's problematic. Okay, how about, like, so as we're kind of wrapping up, I would love, like, for each of you, just kind of like, what's like one piece of advice that if you had somebody who's right in front of you who said, like, I'm not sure about if I should not go to grad school, but like someone who's in graduate school right now, and they're thinking about leaving, what would be the piece of advice that you'd want to offer? Let's kind of go in that circle. Let's go with Bilgesu, and then Kaila, and then Carey, and then we'll wrap it up from there. So Bilgesu, please.
Have a side hustle. Take up internships if you can. Have something going on the side so that if you finally decide to leave, something else will be waiting for you. I wish someone told me that while I was there. Don't just like put all your eggs in one basket. It's just like, basic traditional kind of like wisdom. But yeah, I didn't know that. So yeah, even if like, you don't have like a work permit, like I'm talking to internationals here, I could have still like freelanced or something. I wish I started that way earlier. So that would be my one advice. Have something going on the side, even if it's like, I don't know, 5 hours a week. Do it.
I think that's excellent advice, by the way. That's actually, if I look back and I think about like a regret that I had during my time there, there's a lot about my grad school years that when I look back now, and after the fact, I'm actually really proud of, and, really can kind of look back and take some joy and some pleasure in. But I do regret that idea of having stayed so insular and allowing the voices around me that kind of promoted that, win out at the end of the day. The other thing, though, that I would say is, if you're having those doubts, like taking some time to actually take a step back and reflect, I think is just really, really key. It's never a be all end all kind of situation. Most programs do have ways to withdraw or take leaves, and it's important to explore those options if you feel like you need to take a bit of a breath, because you're not necessarily going to get the space in the program to do this level of self-reflection that you need while sort of caught up in the middle of it. So I think that's really, really important. And then the other thing I would just say is, return back to the thing that you loved about your discipline to begin with. We were all drawn to a subject matter for a reason. Sometimes it's usually not the things that we weren't drawn to those disciplines because we wanted to all be professors. There was something else about the subject matter that drew us in. So re-exploring what that was, and kind of figuring out what that actually means. I think that's really, really key as well to figure out your next steps.
I think my advice would be, if you're thinking about leaving, have a conversation with probably someone that's outside of academia versus someone that's inside of academia, because they really could allow you to look at all your perspectives, and they're not going to see it from just that one perspective of higher education. Because I left because of family issues, but when I tried to have those conversations with people in higher ed, it's just like, you don't do stuff like that. So I quickly had to realize I'm talking to the wrong people. Like, when some people tell you to put your family to the side, that's clearly not who you need to talk to. You have to, we have goals when we go in, but we also have to remember, like everyone else has said, like, that doesn't define who you are. And sometimes you're there and you find that you're not happy, and this isn't what I thought it was going to be. And I don't want to dedicate my whole life to studying all this time. Like, there are different things that I want to do. And so I agree. I am the queen of having passive income and side hustles. Have you something else going on in case the bottom falls out? Because like with COVID, the bottom has fell out for some people, and there was nothing for them to fall back on. All they had was academics. They don't know how to function in the quote unquote real world. So I think sometimes we have to stay grounded, and we have to talk to people who are not in that world for them to help us see a true or realistic perspective. And it's okay to walk away. It's not the end of the world. And if you want to go back, you can. And if that program won't take you, guess what? There are other programs out there that will happily welcome you, support you, give you what you need, and put you on the right track. Sometimes it's just a misfit, like you're in the wrong program or you're at the wrong university. And then sometimes you thought you knew what you wanted to do, and you got there and you just like, this is not it. And all of that is okay.
Thank you again to each of you for being here, and for honestly for talking about something that is on it's hard to talk about. Like I've mentioned this in other panels as well, that the idea of leaving academia is akin to leaving a religion. Like, it's something that you just completely devote yourself to, and that's hard to walk away from. But if there's one thing that, like, I've learned, like, just, and it's been kind of reiterated in this conversation by each one of us, it's like when you are in higher education, when you are in that program, that is the only thing that is in front of you. Is like everything is impacted by your existing in this program. And you think that your world, like, you think that world is so big, even your university is like is like you think about, like, oh, there's so many people in my field when I go to this conference. The world is so much bigger than that. And it is full of dedicated, hardworking, really smart people who have found ways to challenge to channel the things that they love doing in a way that makes them money. And how great would that be to make money, right? That, you don't go into education for the money. And so it's really important that if you are thinking about leaving, talk to people who are not in higher education, and start thinking side hustle. Start thinking of those ways of passive income. Like, have something that you can point to that says, this is why I have value, that is outside my connection and relationship to this university affiliation, and get rid of that. Okay, I'm gonna again thank you so much to each one of you for being here. I'm gonna say thank you, and I really appreciate each of you and your thoughts.
Thank you, Eric. Thank you, everyone. It was a great conversation. It makes me feel very hopeful and
good. Hope and encouragement. That's what I'm hoping people feel. Okay, I'm gonna click everybody away, and again, thank you so much. And here we go. Thank you. For all of you who are wondering what to do, there's something that you can do. You can move forward. There are things that are within your control that you can do to feel empowered and to empower other people too. Being open about these conversations is something that I think a lot of people are afraid of doing. It's hard talking about this, especially when you're talking about it with a peer group that is within that structure. You might get a lot of shit for it, and that's hard. But there are places that you can go to have those conversations, and I really hope that you go and that you find those. And I hope that the community that we're trying to build will be a place that that you can do that. And so I really appreciate all of you who are listening or who will be listening in the future. And again, thank you to each one of our presenters. And we'll see you next week.